Okay, so whatever I may or may not say about this car over the next few minutes, it's important to remember that it is at least unique. And I do admire that in all things. You know, like people who haven't got tattoos.
Got there first, anonymous YouTuber, so you can stop typing now.
God damn it! Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is true.
So quite often when somebody finds out what I do, they'll then ask me what I think about their car, or any ordinary car that they're thinking about buying maybe. And then if I answer with ambivalence or less than enthusiasm, or I just say that I don't like it, the usual response tends to be,
well, of course you didn't like it, man, because you're always fannying about in supercars and all that, man, aren't you?
As though it's beyond the professional capability of a car reviewer to see any particular car through the lens of its competitors or its price point or the audience that it's intended for.
But I have to admit that I did struggle with this thing at first. Drove it for a bit, absolutely hated it.
I hated the noisy diesel engine and the sloppy driving experience and the frustrating multimedia screen that bongs all the time. I just didn't get it.
But then I realised, despite what I've just said, that it's because I've been spending a lot of time in this thing lately, a Volvo XC90, a twin engine one, which means it's top of the range basically. And so, I reset my brain and my expectations a bit. I spent a bit more time with the C5 Aircross
and came to quite like it. And that was hard to take because there is a lot about this car that is palpably So I'm gonna go through that stuff first because it's fun, and then I'll come to tell you why I came round to this car. So make sure you stick through this review to the end if you can.
Okay, look at it, right? It looks like they had two front ends designed for it, and they couldn't decide which one they liked best, so they just used both. And then these bits at the side look like they've developed a boil that needs lanced.
This is the biggest cyst that I've ever seen.
It's basically a massive and nondescript box with bits stuck all over it. It's like Citroen did a junior school design workshop one afternoon and then just used that. Inside, it's not that much better really. Like, it looks okay, but when you're actually sat in there, it's more plasticky and scratchy than your girlfriend's new lips.
Hi everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel.
Citroen has tried to make this thing feel premium in that way that manufacturers do, as in by swathing some layers of soft touch plastics around the cabin. So you get a bit here above the glove box and here above the instrument binnacle and here on the door cards. But it still all just feels a bit hollow and naff. It's not just that though, it's that classic thing that Citroen does of putting aesthetics way in front of the user experience. So I'll give you an example, different class of car and all that, but still. I was driving an Audi A4 the other week. Audi knows that when you drive, you'll quite often put your elbow on the center console, and that means that you need somewhere to rest your hand. So what Audi's done with the A4 is it's designed the gear lever as a handrest as well, so your hand sits nicely on top of it. And that's something that you don't really think about until you think about it. It's just a good bit of design, right? It's ergonomic. By contrast, in this thing, there's always this sense that it's slightly awkward. Gear lever is an example of that. It feels too far away. It feels like it's on the wrong side of the center console. Almost as though this car was engineered for left-hand drive and Citroen couldn't be bothered to re-engineer the center console properly and the gear selector for right-hand drive cars. And oh look, there's virtually no glove box for the same reason. In the glove box, there's this big covered section which is presumably got circuit boards or something in it, but what it means is that you're left with this tiny tic-tac box sized space where you're supposed to have a proper big storage space. Dead annoying. Having said that, the center console here does have a huge storage space underneath it. In fact, it's big enough to fit a whole coat, size L. And the seat doesn't feel like it goes down far enough, so you're kind of perched on top of the car rather than being sat down into it. And then of course there's the infotainment, and good God, I am sick to death of whinging about Citroen infotainment, so I'm not gonna bother.
It goes on.
The drive, oh, it's the automotive equivalent of this guy. Proper noisy.
Success with that, it's the ending bell! Oh!
Soft as This diesel engine is just unpleasant. It does feel a generation behind. It's noisy, it's really noisy when it's cold. It hates revving. It doesn't actually have that much low range pull. It makes the car feel like really heavy. It feels like it just hasn't got enough torque. God, overtaking in this thing is, as Alan Partridge put it, a long, drawn out affair. And this 8-speed gearbox, whose number of ratios I will always remember because of its name, Eat 8.
Just eat it, eat it.
I do that gag every time I drive a car with one of these gearboxes, but it always makes us laugh. Anyway, it is very smooth, perfectly suited to the relaxed nature of this car. Blah-de, blah-de, la-de-da-de, gearbox impressions, etc. It would be lovely to drive a car with an automatic gearbox that is really bad, wouldn't it? So I could say something other than, the gearbox is dead smooth and it flicks between the ratios effortlessly. So yeah, lots not to like about this. But, yep, here it comes. In a world in which Big Vag is firing out variously badged SUV-shaped cars like ping pong balls, we should applaud Citroen's idiosyncrasy, no matter what the result is, right? And there is much to like about the C5 Aircross, like the softness. The softness. Now it's true that it takes the gentlest of prods, the shallowest of potholes I mean, to unsettle this car. But the majority of the time, the suspension is doing a bloody decent impression of a Range Rover's. Shamelessly comfortable, this thing. It is generally as soft as can be, and I think quite a lot of people are going to like that. What that also means, of course, is that it takes to corners like Louis Theroux took to hip-hop.
I gotta hate this money, it's all on me. We gotta get this cheese,
Louis,
it's all we
Louis,
need.
Louis.
I gotta make this money.
Louis, you're supposed to let me do my part first.
The steering is really light and it's fairly sharp, so it does get this big bloody SUV moving around quite effortlessly. And that makes it feel decent around town. It doesn't feel as cumbersome as it might. As Louis Theroux might say, it's good on the streets.
For sure.
Now you do occasionally wish it had a little bit more sharpness so that you didn't have to turn it quite as much to get it moving around corners, especially at sort of mid-speed. Having said that, one of the main characteristics of this car is this propensity to feel like it's going to topple over when it's cornering. So actually, maybe giving it even sharper steering would be a bad thing. It's down to a suspension setup that Citroen's marketing department has christened Progressive Hydraulic Cushions, which the company says gives the C5 Aircross a flying carpet effect. Why don't you watch this video while I go and try and cleanse myself of that metaphorical hate crime.
I gotta make this money, it's all on me. We gotta get this cheese, it's all we need. I gotta make this money, it's all on me. Louis, Reese and Big and the BBC. My money doesn't jiggle jiggle, it folds. I wanna see you wiggle wiggle, for sure. It makes me wanna dribble dribble, you know.
Fascinating stuff, eh? Anybody that says this car doesn't suffer from excessive body roll is lying. It's like the body roll is built into the car to make it comfortable, and that's just like a price that you have to pay. Yeah, it's not a driver's car, so let's not really dwell on that, eh? And then there's the driving position. So yeah, it's on the high side. You feel like you're sat up into the car a little bit too much for my liking, but it's actually generally fine, and that's not something you can always say about a Citroen. See the C4 Cactus and the ergonomic disaster that is as a good example. And the highness means that you do get that proper sort of towering over the other little people on the road effect. And that, combined with the softness and the lightness of the steering and stuff, gives it that luxury SUV feel at times. Forget about what you're surrounded by if you forget about the dashboard and all that. It has the feel of a Range Rover at times. Also, it's extremely very practical. Loads of headspace, loads of leg space at the back, and you can slide the back chairs individually because they are individual chairs rather than being a rear bench. And they're really soft and flat. And usually flat chairs is something you criticize a car for, but here they just work really well because they are so comfortable and so in keeping with the nature of the car. Massive boot, and a clever one at that. Big enough to keep this big round thing in. In conclusion, it's large, practical and comfy. And in the last of those senses especially, it's a welcome alternative to the sort of pseudo hatchback firmness that you get from a lot of crossover SUVs now. And so ultimately you conclude that this does have its own sort of appeal. And I think that's what it took me a while to come around to, that most crossovers now are a lot more dynamic than this, but once you're attuned to the fact that this is just supposed to be comfortable and you get on board with that, it's really good. But that doesn't answer the question as to whether it's actually a good buy. Well, it does kind of look expensive at a cursory glance. Look, starts at about £25,000 and it's easy to spend north of 30 grand on one of these. But if you look at like the Honda CR-V or the Peugeot 3008 or the Ford Edge, you'll see that actually it's about on point when it comes to the list price. Now, does the cabin feel special? Does it feel like it's worth 25 to 30 grand? Nope. But you do get a lot of space and a lot of stuff. You only need to look at Le Configurateur,
which is French for Le Configurator, to see just how much kit comes as standard. I won't read that stuff out to you. You can go there yourself. It's on the French internet. Also, look at the boot space. It's that you're paying for with the C5 Aircross. You're paying for its unique combination of comfort and space. Personally, I would always choose something that's a bit more driver friendly than this, a bit more involving, with a less baffling interior and ostensibly higher quality. But I'm not necessarily talking about Volkswagen Group stuff, right? Although that would fit the bill. Because actually the underneath bits of this car also underpin something that I would choose every day of the week over this. The Peugeot is absolutely brilliant. In fact, the 3008 is, in my opinion, the best crossover to drive of all of them. So what you've got is the most dynamic crossover and the least dynamic crossover on the same chassis. But if company car tax is your main concern, then I would tell you to get a Honda CR-V, because that is actually very good. It's one of the few hybrids that's genuinely enjoyable to drive, for a big crossover, that is. The end. Want to know more? There's plenty of stuff on the Honest John website. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Subscribe to the channel. Bye.